said, okay, I won't get angry. What other advice can you give me? And the Prophet ﷺ over and over again, he says, La taghdab, don't get angry. That's the only piece of advice he gives him. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. All he says is don't get angry. Right? Because this is something that, again, we as Muslims, we take very seriously, but it's something we also struggle with. We struggle with. We find it very difficult to control our anger. And we make excuses in the sense that we say that, it's because the other person really deserved our anger, right? How many times do we hear that? That I wasn't doing anything. I was completely minding my business. I wasn't doing anything wrong. And this person came and started screaming at me. Of course I'm going to get angry. But that's actually not what Allah is teaching us. Allah is teaching us that even in those moments, we need to exercise even more anger restraint. We need to push ourselves even more in those moments. Right? There's no concept in our tradition where the Prophet ﷺ just says like, yeah, just get angry, it's fine. Right? We find that Allah and His Messenger both, the Prophet ﷺ tells us in the Sunnah, and Allah multiple times in the Quran is telling us to control our anger. This is extremely important, right? And it becomes extremely important, especially when you're being accused and you're dealing with things that are not even your fault. Right? And one of my beloved teachers, Imam Asif, who used to be a part of this community before, he mentioned to me that a very beautiful quote, and he said that people don't throw stones at trees that don't bear fruit. Right? He said people don't throw stones at trees that don't bear fruit. And what does that mean? That means that, like, if you are somebody who is trying to do good, you're trying to benefit people, you're trying to live as a good Muslim, there will be people that are going to test you in that. There will be people that are going to push you and that are going to come to you in a very rude way, that are going to come to you and address you in an ignorant way. And in those moments, it's important to really keep track and remember these ayat, okay? So we'll move to the next characteristic. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, وَالَّذِينَ يَبِيتُونَ لِرَبِّهِمْ سُجَّدًا وَقِيَامًا. Those who spend the night bowed down in sajda or standing, worshipping their Lord. So what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about here? He's talking about the night prayer, tahajjud, or qiyam al-layl. When you're standing, that these are the people who they spend their nights standing in salah, in devotion and worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That they are willing to give up their sleep, they're willing to give up, they're willing to make sacrifices, they're willing to do all of these things so that they can stand and pray tahajjud. And this is one of the most forgotten sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ. In fact, if we look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, we learn something very beautiful about tahajjud, right? Is that in the early stages of seerah, in the early stages of prophethood, tahajjud was actually mandatory on the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And there's so many wisdoms and blessings that the scholars, they look at this and they take away, right? But one of the most important ones is that this was something that was used to prepare the Prophet ﷺ for his prophethood, for what was to come. Because we know that he went through so many hardships, he went through so many difficulties, he went through tremendous trials throughout his life. And one of the most important training aspects, one of the most important things that prepared him for that, to be able to handle those moments, was tahajjud, right? Was this relationship. In Surah Muzammil, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about this, and He mentions stand in the night for a portion of it, Allah then later mentions Inna sanulqi alayka qawlan thaqila. When speaking about the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that soon Allah is gonna pass on to the messenger a heavy word, a very heavy word, and with that, and this is referring to the Quran, and with that a heavy task. And Allah is connecting that with tahajjud, right? The idea is that in order to be able to fulfill the prophethood that the messenger was given, he needed tahajjud, right? This was something that he needed to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And we know that there's so many merits that come from this sunnah, from praying tahajjud, and one of them that a lot of us are familiar with, but it's so beautiful, so I'll mention it again, where we're taught in a hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descends to the lowest heaven, during the last third of the night. And many of us are familiar with this, but we don't really understand how amazing and how much of a blessing this truly is, right? That Allah every single night is giving us, and subhanAllah, we look forward to these big opportunities that we have throughout the year, right? Like many of us, of course, and we should do this, we look forward to Ramadan because this is our chance to connect with Allah in ways that are difficult outside of Ramadan. And a lot of us, that we move forward in our connections with Allah, specifically during Ramadan. Then even within Ramadan itself, we look forward to the last 10 nights, we look forward to Laylatul Qadr, and we look forward to all of these things. And there's all these blessed days throughout the year that we look forward to, and that's great, and we should be doing that. But we forget that there's certain blessings which Allah has given us even today, even on a daily basis. That we don't need to wait for Ramadan to come for us to stand in tahajjud. Because this is something that Allah is telling us He's doing not just during Ramadan, but this is something that Allah is doing on a daily basis. So what does Allah say? That He comes to the lowest heaven, and He calls out, and He says that who is calling to me so that I may answer? Which of my servants are calling so that I may answer? And then He says, who is asking so that I may give? Who is asking of me so that I may give? And who is seeking forgiveness so that I may forgive him? Right? And this happens every single night. Allah lowers Himself. He comes down to the lowest heaven so that He comes closer to us as His slaves, as His servants, and this is an opportunity that exists and that we need to take advantage of. And again, it was so important. This was something that again was mandatory for the Prophet ﷺ because it was so important for his relationship. You want to know why Ibad al-Rahman are able to do all of the characteristics that we're going to mention? How is it that they're able to control their anger when people approach them? How is it that they're able to have humility in everything that they do? How is it that they're able to do all of these actions that we mentioned? Is because one of the main reasons is because they spend their nights in prayer. Right? They spend their nights connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that when they're faced with challenges during the daytime, they can overcome them. They can overcome them. So this is again a huge sunnah that is largely forgotten and that we need to keep track of. The next that's mentioned here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, He says, وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا اصْرِفْ عَنَّا عَذَابَ جَهَنَّمَ. And they make dua, they call out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our Lord, keep the punishment of hell away from us. إِنَّ عَذَابَهَا كَانَ غَرَامًا. Indeed, its punishment is something that's unrelenting. It continues and it's so severe and harsh. إِنَّهَا سَاءَتْ مُسْتَقَرًّا وَمُقَامًا. Indeed, it's an evil home and a resting place. Okay, so what's going on in this ayah? This is really, really beautiful. There's a few things that we have to mention here. Is that, number one, the Ibad al-Rahman are being described as people who are constantly making dua for protection from hellfire. Right? And why does Allah mention this in particular? It almost seems like, this is not that big of a deal, right? Many people who don't fulfill all of the other characteristics of Ibad al-Rahman, they'll still seek forgiveness from hellfire. This is something that a lot of people will do. So why does Allah mention it in this context specifically is actually something very beautiful. Is that this person, he doesn't, even though he is somebody who is controlling his anger, he's somebody who is humble, he's somebody who's standing in the night for salah, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though all of those things are happening, he does not rely on those deeds to be something that saves him from hellfire. Even with that, he understands that the only way to be saved from hellfire is through the mercy of Allah. He understands that, right? One of the biggest tragedies and the biggest pitfalls that we fall into as Muslims is that we think that just because we do a good deed, it means that it's accepted. It means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has accepted it. Right? We don't hold ourselves to a really high standard in the sense that we don't question ourselves. right? Some of the scholars, they say that they would spend so much time just questioning their actions after they did it. Was I really sincere in this moment? Did I really do it to the best of my ability? What were the deficiencies that I had in this action? Was there a moment while I was doing this action where maybe my intention was split? Where it was partially for Allah and partially for the people? Did this happen? Did these things happen? Right? And so we need to really, really be critical of our deeds. That just because, and one of the reasons why this happens is because we become, or our deeds become routine. They become habitual, like they become habits for us. Right? Some of us, mashallah, I see people here, some of us, we're in the masjid every single day for all 5 salawat. And that's beautiful. That's an amazing blessing, and that's something that pleases Allah for sure. Right? But what happens is when we get stuck in the habit of doing something, then we lose sight of the essence of the deed itself. It just becomes, a routine. It just becomes a habit. We're going to the masjid just because we've always been going to the masjid. We're reciting Quran just because we've always been reciting Quran. But when we recite the Quran, when we go to the masjid, it doesn't affect our hearts. It doesn't affect our actions. It doesn't affect anything else. It's just movements. It's just movements that don't affect the heart. And so here Allah is mentioning this because this person, even though they're doing such incredible things, and we're going to mention so many more characteristics that they're doing, even though those things are happening, they still refuse to let themselves become complacent. They refuse to get comfortable. They still have like this constructive paranoia, right? This constructive paranoia where they're always worried about whether or not Allah is actually accepting their deeds, right? And there's balance to this as well, right? It's not something where you should be so worried about your deeds to the point where you stop doing them, which is another extreme that some people fall into, is that I don't know if my salah is ever going to be accepted, so I'm just not going to pray. Right? And I've heard people and I've seen people who fall into this as well. That this is the other aspect of it. So we need to have a balance between these two, that we need to strive towards these good deeds, but at the same time we can't be overconfident in these good deeds. Right? We can't be overconfident. We need to constantly make dua that Allah accepts them to begin with. So then this person, because he's not reliant on his deeds, he is constantly making dua that Allah prevents him or pushes the punishment of hellfire away from him. Right? And he mentions something beautiful here. He says, إِنَّهَا سَاءَتْ مُسْتَقَرَّ وَمُقَامًا. Right? He says that it's an evil home and it's an evil resting place. So 2 words are mentioned here, mustaqar and maqam. Right? And the difference between these 2 words is that one of them is referring to somewhere where you stay temporarily. Right? Maqam is somewhere where you're temporarily, there. So if you're visiting in another state or another country and you're there for just a few days or a few weeks, then that area will be your maqam. That's just an area where you're staying temporarily. But your mustaqar, that's your permanent residence. Right? So where you live now, your actual home, this is your mustaqar. So when this person is making dua to be protected from hellfire, they're covering both of these things. They're saying that hellfire is a horrible place to be for even a moment, or if it's for all of eternity. So it's a horrible place to be for all of eternity, to stay there forever. But even more so than that, it's a horrible place for even a moment, right? And how many people do you find that they recite the verses of the Quran and they read the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and they know that anybody who is Muslim, anybody who testifies to the oneness of Allah and the Prophet ﷺ being his messenger, will be admitted into Jannah. Right? We know this, that anyone from the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ will be admitted into Jannah. And so how many people use this as an excuse? And they tell themselves, I'm going to eventually go to Jannah. It's okay if I'm in hellfire for some time. Right? A lot of people, they have this mentality. And even if they don't say it explicitly, this is what's said by their actions. that they're okay with it, with committing sins, they're okay with being lazy in their good deeds, because they know in their head, or they think in their head, that eventually they'll go to Jannah. So it's okay if you're there for a little bit of time. But the Ibadur Rahman, they don't do that. They don't hold themselves to this standard. They hold themselves to a much higher standard. And they say that it's a horrible place to be for eternity, and even more so than that, it's a horrible place to be even for a small portion of time. They don't want anything to do with Jahannam. And so they hold themselves to that standard. They make dua that Allah protects them from Jahannam entirely, not even for a moment that they want to be there. How much time, Brother Tanveer, do we have?
We have about 13 minutes.
13 minutes? Okay, inshallah. So we'll maybe do one or two more and then we'll end. So the next characteristic which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions is وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا أَنفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرِفُوا وَلَمْ يَقْتُرُوا وَكَانَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ قَوَامًا. So beautiful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions those who spend neither wastefully nor stingily, but they're moderately in between, right?